Good evening, Ari.
Good evening.
Hi, Walter.
Zeb Ben Shmuel.
No, Reb Chaim. We're missing you, Reb Chaim.
Yeah, me too.
If you were missing us, you would come to help us with the minyan.
Hashem soon.
Okay, so we are in Tzurba M'Rabanan, Volume 4. How to page 244. How to deal with tolaim. How to ensure insect-free food. Last time we learned that the Aruch HaShulchan said that you don't have to use a microscope, but so anything microscopic, it's not a problem. But this week we're going to continue with insects that are visible but difficult to see. We learned last week that the accepted approach of most poskim is that microscopic insects are not forbidden. But we saw that the Aruch HaShulchan stated that even if an insect is visible only with difficulty, like you got to check it in the sun, it's still forbidden. So for this reason, many poskim, such as the Sefer HaKashrus, state that it is not permitted to consume insects that are difficult to identify due to the background or because it's difficult to discern its shape. There's the Sefer HaKashrus. Koshi b'ri'iyah, hanoveh machmas hareka. If it's difficult to see because of the background, otzuras hatolas, or maybe because it's camouflaged well, the way the worm is created and it's hard to detect, but it's visible, eino matiras hatolas. That does not allow you to eat it. Uveklal elu, tolas levana bekemach. There are white worms in flour. This problem with flour we're going to see if we get there. I think we'll get there tonight. Is more of a problem in Israel. Zvuvin yarok, green flies al alechasa on lettuce. The zachalim hatmunim betoch ove ha'alim, and other crawling insects that are sort of within the crevices of the lettuce. V'hagon Rav Moshe Vai Shlita b'sifro b'dikat hamazon k'alacha. Rav Moshe Vai is one of the world experts in tolaim. Hevi b'shem hagon Rav Yosef Sholem Elyoshev shekol shenitin lavchin b'davar, as if you can identify it, even though it takes effort. Afilu drusha hitamsut legalutot. It requires some effort. Osir. Kimo kain, tolat haniret kinekuda. If you see a worm that's like a spot, opas shachor, uvahagdala mazimota ketolat, and with a magnifying glass, you identify it as a worm. So I mean, you saw it. It's not that it's invisible. You see a black spot. You don't know what it is. You look at magnifying glass. You see that it's a worm. You can't eat it because it's visible. Yeah, so you remove it. Susie and I went on a trip to Costa Rica a few years ago. I don't know if you remember. And the mashgiach brought an X-ray box. It was a flat X-ray box, and they checked every lettuce leaf. You know, they would shine the light below the leaf. They have these big romaine leaves. And they would inspect. It would take them hours and hours to inspect every lettuce leaf.
The X-ray box was retro-illuminated. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it was a flat X-ray box, Bernie, that they would turn on, and there would be a light, and they would put the lettuce on top of the X-ray box so they could see the light, sort of through it.
Light box.
A light box, yeah, and that's at these big, I assume, in the caterers in these big programs, that's how they do it. Here he didn't use a magnifying glass, but he did use the light from below the lettuce to identify it. Uladas Hagon Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Zatzafilo Tolat Nirid Kinekuda. Even you have a worm that's the size of a dot. Umumche Mavir Lanu Shazu Tolat. And a mumcha says, oh yeah, that's an insect. So it's asura. And maybe somebody with very good vision can discover it. Even if some people can't see it, but somebody with good vision can see it, that would be asur. I just want to read a footnote. One common question that arises with regard to checking for bugs is how is it possible that this issue was never problematic in previous generations, while nowadays it's so prevalent that many types of fruit and vegetables may be forbidden unless you check them. One possible response is that growing conditions, as well as the variety of fruits and vegetables grown, has changed significantly in recent times and may have contributed to the increase in insects within food products. In addition, the truth is that a quick perusal of many of the works of the Achronim to Siman 84 in the Shulchan Aruch, including the Chochmah Sadim, the Kaf HaChaim, the Darchei Tshuva, reveals a large amount of discussion among bugs found in food and drinking substances. So they were these. You're talking about the last 200 years. Is the Chochmah Sadim, the Kaf HaChaim is in the 1800s. So they were concerned about these issues back then as well. Now, some vegetables that often contain insects and are particularly difficult to check because of this include strawberries and broccoli. And we will discuss this more in the next year. Even according to those opinions who do not allow eating these foods without checking, it may be permitted to inspect them as best as possible and then grind or crush them as suggested by the Sefer HaKashrus. He says, Michael shekashel l'nakosu ba'ofen muchlat. Let's say you have a food that's impossible to clean it. V'nivdak kechol shenitin karoi. And you've checked it as best you can, mutter l'tochano, you can grind it, latzeit mikla chashash. Because remember, gentlemen, we learned last week that the problem is with a beria, right? A beria is a complete insect, a whole insect. Once it's broken up into pieces, and then it's mevatel b'shishim, then it's not a problem. That's why he's suggesting that you grind it if you can't do a good check. Kenev Yagon Rav Moshe Vai, Sheshama Magon Rav Yosef Shalom El Yoshev, Umagon Rav Shmuel Vosner, right? The Shevet HaLevi. They're the ones who suggested this. V'chein Magon Rav Ben Sion Abba Shol, Sheyerek Shekosher L'Nakoso. If you have a vegetable that's difficult to clean, Kagon, Patrusli, parsley, Shenukta Yitevim Svov V'Sabon, and it was checked, and they cleaned it with a sponge. V'rak sofek, and it's only sofek in notrin tolayim, mutar l'tochno the blender. You can grind it in the blender. Ulamaisla das agon Rav Ben Sion Abba Shol, maspik l'tzotz dak b'sakin, or you can cut it, with a knife like you cut scallions. However, me'idich l'das agon Rav Shlomo Yosef Shlomo El Yoshev tzarech l'tochno ba'ofen shachatichot tiyana yoter ktanot ma'tolayim. They have to be very, very small, even smaller than the insect, which he thinks would require a blender. According to these poskim, since one crushes the insect in this manner, the insect is now bottled to the rest of the food, as opposed to when it's whole, where it's a berry and it's not bottled. Remember, we use the principle of filu be'elef lo bottle. The reason that one must first check for bugs is that so then the shaila is, why are we making you go through the process of checking if you're going to grind it anyways? So there is a concept of ein mevatel isur l'chatchila. For example, you know that there is a 60, you have a piece of pork, right? Or even some milk. You're not allowed to directly put it into your dish. You know that there's 60 times as much. You're not allowed to be mevatel isur l'chatchila, be a dayan. It's only after the fact you find out, something fell in, and you know how much it is, and you know that you have shishin, then b'diavad we matter the food. But you can't do it l'chatchila. Same thing here. You have to check the bugs, otherwise we consider it mevatel isur l'chatchila, intentionally attempting to nullify a prohibited item. But if one has already inspected the food, if one's already inspected and it's uncertain whether there are any insects that remain, it's only a suffix, so therefore it's permitted to employ bittul. Another example of insects that are difficult to discern are aphids, which are sometimes found on citrus fruits and appear as red or brown dots. They come off easily by scraping them with one's fingernail and should be removed before eating. This is permitted even on Shabbos, as noted by Shmira Shabbos Kilchasa. Mutter l'asir b'Shabbos es ha-kinimot, which are these aphids, shal gabi klipas pri hadar, which are on the peel, o elishu avru lepri atzmor, those that have gone into the fruit itself. V'dinan le'inyan zeh k'din cherek adol shemitzah lechasa. It's like a large insect found on a leaf. Therefore, they have to be removed before you eat it. Le'in yisr tolaim l'chor yesh lomar shim efshar shiyagiu l'matzav sheyefshar lahavchin b'chayutam u'v'kishosa. Now, you're not going to be able to check whether they're alive. Lo shaykh klal l'kanosim b'shem sheretz hashoretz. Then you'll at least won't be able to call them a crawling thing. Shamati magon Rosh Zalman, Vayin Chochmas Adam, Klal Ches, and the Aruch HaShulchan Yoredeya, the same thing. Achar Zman Chozerba. Later he retracted. Vamagon Rosh Zalman, Shenodalo mi ba'ei beito shel Chazon Ish, shechashash bezel iser tolaim. גם נודע לו כי לפני שהקנימות נסכסות בקליפת המגן, יכולים להרגיש קצת בחששון גם בין רגילה. Sometimes you can see them move. So anyways, they have to be removed. The Yaakov Losef, though, rules in accordance with the original, more lenient opinion of Rav Shlomo Zalman, that if it's impossible to discern the insect's movement, the prohibition does not apply. It's worthwhile to mention that Rav Eliezer Melamed, which will be published in the future in the newest editions of his work, the Pnei Halacha, also mentions a more lenient approach to the issue of the consumption of insects, even when you can discern the movement. This approach argues that in cases where it's difficult for an ordinary person to see the insect without difficulty, and he has no desire to eat it, it may be considered as bottle to the food, especially since it's quite small. He rules that in practice one may rely on this more lenient approach in many cases, though he agrees that there's certainly room for the more stringent approach as well, which is maintained by the poskim we mentioned, as well as kashrus organizations both in Israel and in the Golah, though they may differ with regard to some details and concerning specific fruits or vegetables.
Even if he knows that the thing is alive, moving around.
Because he's using also the principle, Sydney, of no kavana. His kavanah is to eat the food, not the insect. So we're going to see by chaylev and dam, you're nene from it. So let's say by chaylev, you can't use that heter. It's bottle. I didn't have kavanah to eat the chaylev because there people are nene from it. But here nobody's nene from eating the insect. So that's what he's relying on. He's relying on bittul. And remember, it's difficult to remember. We had shitas that say, well, if you can't see it at all, or it's only seen with difficulty, there are areas to be lenient. All the poskim we learned tonight are very machmir, and based on those approaches, the kashrus organizations follow them. But Rav Eliezer Melamed is more lenient, and that's why he's put in the footnote here. Now, given that checking for insects prior to consuming some fruits and vegetables is an extremely important undertaking, we must determine upon whom we can rely that the foods that have been checked are indeed free of any concern. So the question is, can a child check? A child is generally not believed when it comes to any declarations regarding Isser. Says the Rivash, who was a Rishon in Spain, lived in Barcelona. The Eidechot Nemen Bisurin, Omer Kamosha Kosmosech Kiddushin, Omer Lo Eidechot Nitmu Toy Rosecha. Let's say one person says, the food that you thought was tar, somebody tummy touched it. The Halo Shoseh. And the other person is quiet. Neman. He's believed. Atam Yishum Deidechot Nemen Bisurin. Aval cotton enu nemen la osro, but not a cotton. A cotton can't serve as an aid. Nevertheless, the Ramah writes that if a child tests information concerning a rabbinic prohibition, he is believed, even if it yields a kula, a lenient conclusion, as long as the item does not already have a presumption, a chazak, of being forbidden. Cotton, ein lo din aid lios neman bisur. Mikol makom b'cotton charif uvoki b'davar. Let's say it's a very smart cotton, and perhaps maybe he's an expert in something. V'ikra reglaim l'davar, and maybe there's circumstantial evidence. Yesh lachmir imeid al davar isur. If he says something is asur, we should be machmir. If he made al isur drabon and lahakel, then he says if it's a rabbinic prohibition, and he gives some testimony that would lead to a leniency, as long as v'lo ischazik isura, as long as there's no presumption that the thing is asur. If you go b'dikas chametz, like searching for chametz, and the child says, "Oh, we checked that room." So neman, dem nus rabbanon b'rabbanon. But if the item is something that there's already a chazaka, that there's an isra there, we can't rely on a leniency. Now, based on this ruling of the Ramah, children may only inspect fruits or vegetables that are not presumed to be infested. Now, tonight, as we go further in this year, hopefully we get to part 2, which I think we will, we're going to talk about fruits and vegetables that are presumed to be infested. And then we're going to deal with fruits and vegetables. But it's only in my... What was that?
Hager's staring.
David.
That
Mario, could you mute Hager's line? Thank you.
Is in Israel.
So bayit shehuchzik shalobotko amaskir. Let's say there's a house that you've rented, and there's no. We don't know for sure whether the person has checked it or not. V'omru isho eved okotten anu bat kanu, and a child says, "We checked it. Are elu nemanim b'hushiyei kotten sheish bo das livto." So children may only inspect fruits and vegetables that are not presumed to be infested, since there's no presumption of a prohibition. This is consistent with the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch below regarding searching for chametz the night before Pesach, that a child is believed if he says he checked the room for chametz, since the mitzvah of b'dikas chametz is only rabbanon if the chametz has already been nullified. Right? The night of b'dikas chametz, we also do bittul. So the whole searching is all midrabanan anyway. And therefore, if he says he checked the room, you can rely on him. Nevertheless, the Mishnah Berurah writes that one should ideally not rely on the inspection of a child, since it involves significant effort, and the child may not search properly, even by b'dikas chametz. If you find out on Pesach, 3 days into Pesach, that the child was the one who inspected it, you don't have to go back and recheck it. Assume that it was checked. Only b'di'evet. But you shouldn't give a command to your minor children the night of b'dikas chametz to go check the rules. You got to do it yourself. Now, the Mishnah Berurah comments here clearly refer to women as well as children. But the Aruch HaShulchan writes with regard to women that the halacha differs from that of the child. He explains that in our times, women are often more punctilious about cleaning than men, and may therefore certainly be relied upon when it comes to b'dikas chametz, if they claim that they've already inspected for chametz. Now, concerning the halacha for women checking for insects, we'll have that in detail. So based on these sources, the Sefer Kashrus rules that although children may check foods for insects that are not assumed to be infested, and we're going to see which ones are assumed to be infested, which ones are not, ideally they should do so only when eating it themselves, but not for adults. We rely on their checking only fruits and vegetables that are presumed not to have them, and they should only check the food that they're going to eat themselves, but not an adult. What about, can you rely on inspection by non-observant Jews? May a non-religious Jew clean or check fruits and vegetables for insects? The answer to this question is based upon the halach of credibility in general with regard to one who does not keep certain halachot. According to the Gemara in Bucharos, one who is suspected about a matter, for example, he doesn't keep a certain mitzvah, may not judge a case about it, right, about that matter, nor testify about it, right, where it's relevant. Based on this, the Shulchan Aruch rules that one who does not keep a certain mitzvah is not believed with regard to it, though he is believed with regard to other matters. You know that this person is Jew, but he violates this specific avera. As long as it's not mavodah zara v'chilul Shabbos b'farhesia, as long as he's not an idolater, or as long as he doesn't violate Shabbos in public, or she'enu mamin b'divrei Rabboseinu zal, or you know that he doesn't believe in rabbinic law at all. Neman b'shari. So those are some very significant exclusions. So we said if you know he worships avodah zarah, that's not that common, but violating Shabbos and not believing in chachamim, so in that case you wouldn't be able to rely on him on anything. But if he wasn't any of those, even though for example, he eats chazer, you know that he eats chazer, but you don't know about other averos. Neman b'shar isurim, you would believe him by other isurim. That, and particularly, we don't believe him regarding an issue that relates to himself. Regard to something food that belonged to other people, and even though it's an issue that he violates, we can believe him regarding that matter as well to say that it's permitted. And Rav Moshe Feinstein rules this way in practice concerning believing somebody regarding shchita. There's a rumor that he's not a reliable shochet. And he was disqualified, therefore, from being believed regarding shchita. It's a specific rumor that has spread, and the rumor keeps on spreading. That's called a kala deloy pasuk. So b'davar hashoichet hu boidek, not just a shoichet, but a mashgiach who checks afterwards. Asher kvar biyoto shoichet hu boidek b'mkom harishon rinenu alav v'chilul Shabbos b'seiser. Let's say there was a rumor that he was a machal Shabbos privately. Aval niskabel arkach l'shoichet hu boidek St. Louis, but he moved to St. Louis, and they accepted him there as a shoichet. There was a rumor that didn't stop. So therefore he's called a mumer. A mumer is somebody who violates one. So you could be a mumer l'davar echad, you could be a mumer l'chol haTorah kula. But he was a mumer l'davar echad, which was Shabbos only privately. He didn't violate Shabbos publicly. He watched television in his house, but outside he didn't drive a car. You didn't see him violate Shabbos publicly. So, so the Shach and the Rosh were machmir and said you couldn't rely on a shchita. The Koshken la Rambam. The Koshken b'Mechal Shabbos af b'tzina b'zman hazeh. And even in Mechal Shabbos, even privately today, b'shvil te'ovon cotton kazeh Lashen sigariot. Like, let's say somebody wants to smoke a cigarette on Shabbos. So Rav Moshe specifically talked about Chilul Shabbos. He didn't talk about other Isurim. So based on the above sources, it would seem that one who does not keep kosher is not believed concerning the purchase of, inspection of, or cleaning of food items that are presumed to be contaminated with insects. So too it is clear that a non-Jew, such as a maid, may not be relied upon with regard to checking for insects. Goy eno neman al bdikas mozim mitoloin. Kamo ken lahavdil Yehudi amizalzel be'isur tolaim. Let's say there's a Jew who doesn't know anything about the din of worms. and he checked it. Omishen shomer Torah mitzvos, and oneman livdo.
Ernie, can I interrupt you a second?
Yes.
That would seem to imply that any kosher hotel or any Pesach program it would require that the mashgiach inspects every piece of vegetable or lettuce or whatever have you, or strawberries, for example. Otherwise, you can't be. Most of the people who work there, whether they're non-Jews or non-observant Jews, would not qualify based on.
Absolutely. So we'll see, Bernie. But it depends what fruit and vegetable we're talking about. We're going to define. Not every fruit and vegetable has to be checked. So those that are infested, everyone has to be checked. So that's correct. Or you'd have to rely to check, and if you didn't find it, they could grind it up, right? Like that heter that we had today, which ground up in a blender. But otherwise, if you're going to eat it, it's going to have to be checked by a religious mashgiach. Correct.
If you talk about vegetables and salads, it's nearly impossible to inspect at all. But we'll give it all a large number of guests.
Well, we'll see which vegetables are considered infested and have to be checked. And we'll see. We'll see if it leads. Hi, David.
Regards from Yerushalayim, number one.
Great to see you.
I'm giving you gun sucker.
I see
Number
it.
two, what happened if you ate from a shoiches that is Mechalel Shabbat, but you found out only after you ate? Is it considered anus? But
Of
you
course.
ate it?
Of course.
Or maybe it's not even anus, since it's kosher, the shchita.
You have no liability if you ate the meat and it was only found out afterwards that it was a problem. Absolutely. Onus Rachmane Patre.
Right, but is it onus? But since it was a shchita, is it onus and onus
No, because
Rachmane Patra? Or
yeah,
it's not even an issue?
Well,
it's not.
Again, when they invalidate a shoichet, they invalidate what he shechts, and they say that what he shechts is treif, because they're not. He's not neman that he shechted it properly. So you can't use you can't use what you said that lemaisa it's kosher, because it's not kosher, because if he's not neman, then he's not believed that he shechted the simonim properly. But he's an onus, definitely an onus.
Okay.
Yeah. Says, what about inspection of insects by women? So Rav Yechiel Epstein, the Aruch HaShulchan, rules that despite the fact that in earlier times questions were raised as to whether a woman was permitted to check, nowadays the checking of women is acceptable in all cases and is actually preferred over that of men. Let's see the Aruch HaShulchan. This is in the Siman of Tolaim, Yoredeya, page. Some people say women are not believed. Listen, we rely on our wives to say that they are a nida or they're not a nida. That's an Isser Torah. That's a Doraisa Dika Isser. She's Neman. But those are things that are not a big Torah. Says some poskim that the Aruch HaShulchan is referring to. Omnam aminag ein okay. B'chol tfutzat Yisrael. He says the custom now. The Aruch HaShulchan passed away in 1910, about that time. So, the Aruch HaShulchan, you're talking about late 1800s, right? Chol hanoshim bodkos hakitnios v'aperos v'ayarkos v'samchinan alei. Our women check the legumes and the fruit and the vegetables. And he quotes the Shach and the Pri Chadash. The Ramah wrote another sefer called Torah Sachatis, where there's a lot of dinim of kashrus there. Over there, the reason why they relied on women, because there was no chazaka of Isser to begin with, so therefore they could be lenient. But no, it's not like that. So it's very clear that women are neman. In fact, our senses tell us, common sense tells us that we should rely on women more. Let's say, men are too busy going off to do business, and women are are more interested in checking. The crazy place he wrote that you can, like eating cooked foods, you can rely on them, but to eat raw vegetables, right? Meaning, when you're eating a raw vegetable, you can check it yourself. And you should check it yourself before you eat to make sure that there's no insect there. He doesn't understand why there was even a Havamina to say that because of the tircha that was involved in checking, that we shouldn't believe our women. We see that our women are very careful when it comes to Yisurim. It's not the same as trying to differentiate between kosher fish and not kosher fish. Because that they used to go to the Rav. The question is, why didn't they just rely on women? Women are not presented with non-kosher fish very frequently. So that's not something that they were occupied with all the time. So maybe they'd be lazy in that issue. But every day in the kitchen, the davar hove betmidus, vegetables they're buying every day, they would never let anything come out of their rishus into the pot before they check carefully. He says, Chas v'sholom, in our day, we never heard of all of our tzaddikim and Gaonei Olam that didn't rely on their wives to check for insects. And let's say a Jewish girls who were hired to work as employees in kitchens. In Balabais Makirota, she Yiras Hashem, with a dective stream, Yachol Ismochalei can rely on her. But the Imlama Yismochalei Bada. Shouldn't rely on her alone. You're a Bahatzmo, Ksheno Isha, or an Ishta Babais, if he has no wife, or there's no wife in the house. Or Isha Manosh Makashush time to Briasa Toloim. Or you can ask a neighbor to come by. So it's a very wonderful Aruch HaShulchan here. According to Aruch HaShulchan, the only case where perhaps women's checking would not be acceptable is with regard to an uncommon prohibition, which they are not so familiar, like we said, to differentiate between kosher and non-kosher fish. Last week, we learned that even experts have a problem differentiating between kosher and non-kosher fish. But today, all other common cases, such as checking for bugs, may be done by women. That's the generally accepted practice today, and the Sefer HaKashrus records it. Kol isha shigula gil mitzvos ne'man livdok mazon v'toloim zot b'tnai sheyodim ketzad livdok u'makirin satolaim ve'echan yesh chapsam. As long as they know where to look and how to look, and that they know what they're doing. What can you inspect for insects on Shabbos? We mentioned earlier concerning citrus fruits that you can rinse them off on Shabbos to remove insects on the peel. But the Sefer Kashrus rules that one may not rinse or soak romaine lettuce in soapy water or vinegar, as there may be live bugs in the leaves that will be killed, thus violating the prohibition of shochet killing. Those of us in the Daf Yomi this week learned that the sheet of Rabbi Leah, if you kill any animal, it's like you killed a camel. There was a shaila about a louse, but a worm is certainly a living thing. You're not allowed to kill a living thing on Shabbos. So if the method of checking romaine lettuce is soaking them in soapy water or vinegar, and then the insects would come off of the vegetable and die, that might be a problem. So it says, Asr l'shoter v'l'hashros b'Shabbos alei chas v'chadom v'mei chometz or mei melech l'asr me'matolem. That would be the same thing for Yontif, Bernie. You're not allowed to kill on Yontif either. Allowed to shecht for food, right? You can shecht on Yontif for ochel nefesh, but you wouldn't be allowed to kill something either on Yontif. On the other hand, simply inspecting fruits or vegetables for bugs is permitted. If one finds a large insect, it's permitted to remove it. That's not considered borer. Though relatively small insects would need to be removed together with a small amount of the food in order to comply with the rules of borer, that you have to, you have to take the good with the bad if it's small. And these rulings are summarized by the Sefer Kashrus. If you're going to go eat vegetables or fruit, and it's a kind of fruit or vegetable that requires bedika on Shabbos, it happens to be Shabbos. Mikradin mutter levoka mukshemotzi tula gedola. Mikradin, you can check it. You see a big insect, you can remove it, and you're not oivar lisser borer. But small insects, yesh laster imaat min hayerek or apri. You have to remove it a little bit with the food. Now, if the only concern is for bugs that are already dead, which is often the case for insect-free lettuce sold in Israel, for which the instructions are to both soak and then briefly rinse them, many poskim do permit rinsing them on Shabbos, though soaking is still forbidden due to potential problems of borer separate. And then it also says, the general rule of borer is that the separation of the undesired item is only forbidden if it is mixed in with the rest of the material. But if it's relatively large and stands out, there is no halachic mixture in the first place. And that's no problem of borer. So that means borer is a problem when something is mixed into a dish and you have to go pick it out. But what they're saying is here, a relatively large insect on a leaf, it's not mixed in the food. You just, by taking it out, there's no borer. But in the case of small insects that blend in more easily with the fruit or vegetable, it's considered a mixture. Therefore, one follows the standard rules of borer, by which one may remove the undesired object together with a small amount of the food. And we're going to have these halachas later on in Tzurba M'Rabanan and Hilchos Shabbos. We'll go into borer in great detail then. We will conclude the first year on the subject of checking for insects with a quote from the Ben Ish Chai that illustrates how serious the issue is and how much responsibility those who must check or clean the pertinent foods have upon them. Says the Ben Ish Chai. Remember, the Ben Ish Chai lived in Baghdad, also in the 1800s. Ma'aseh b'chacham echad, shenichnas be'erev Pesach l'chatzer echad. A chacham went to visit somebody erev Pesach. She found the woman of the house with 2 baskets filled with lettuce. And she was washing the romaine lettuce. And really didn't spend a lot of time checking carefully. And then put it into the basket. The Chacham said to the woman, how many hairs do you have on your head? Amr lo maniti otam. I never counted them. And I don't think you can count how many hairs. Amr lo, you can count the hairs on your head. You can count the hairs of your head, but how many malchus you might get for allowing insects to remain on these vegetables, we will be able to count. What should I do? There's a lot of people, mouths to feed. So they want to eat a lot of lettuce. It's something that they enjoy. When Hashem brings you to the day of judgment, that answer is not going to help. Al-Kain, Shemilat Sati, listen to my advice. But throw away these leaves that need good checking. Just use the stalks, not the leaves. You can use the stalks for more. Just check a little bit, enough to fulfill the obligation of karpas. Let's say So that just, I think, is a nice little story about the seriousness of Tolaim. Okay, let's go to part 2 of Hilchas Tolaim, page 263. In the previous year, we discussed some of the principles concerning the prohibitions involved in the consumption of insects and who's qualified to check. And this year, we will discuss some more details and outline the major categories of foods with regard to the obligation to check for insects. In addition, we will survey some guidelines for common types of fruits and vegetables that require checking. Although we might assume that all insects are prohibited regardless of where they develop and where they are found, the truth is in some cases they might be permitted. The Gemara in Chulin distinguishes between insects that developed in a fruit or vegetable while still attached to the ground and insects that developed after the fruit or vegetable was attached to the ground. We're going to see soon that if it was attached to the ground, those insects are still called sheretz hashoretz ala aretz, because the fruit was technically still connected to the aretz. But if the worm developed in the fruit only after it was plucked off the tree, it would be permitted to eat that insect. Let's see the Gemara. Amar Shmuel, Kishos Shehitlia Ba'avia. The kishos are like cucumbers that had worms in them, while Ba'avia means that they're connected to the ground. Asura, Mishum, Sheretz HaSharetz L'Aretz. It says Rashi to explain Avia. Ba'odam Mechuberes, Sheretz HaAretzi. It would, as long as it was still connected to the tree, the insect in that fruit or in that cucumber is considered a sheretz haaretz. Vasura tula lecho. Kiven de malecha b'tocha kishus. It travels in the cucumber, v'im chuberet b'karka, and the cucumber is still connected to the ground. Havi kimalecha lagabe karka. It's as if this insect is actually walking on the ground as well. Avlatlia la'achar mikan. But let's say it was the cucumber was plucked. Let's say the cucumber was plucked from the tree, and then only later on became infested with a worm.
Yeah,
Now,
beautiful.
What was that? So, if the insect develops in a cucumber that is removed from the tree, and you ate the whole cucumber, technically there's no isser if you ate the insect that's in there, because it's not considered a sheretz hashoretz la'aretz. Now, once it leaves the cucumber and crawls on the ground and goes back into the cucumber, then it's a prohibited sheretz. Now the Gemara continues. Lema Messiah. I'll give you support to this concept. The Tani Chada, one brayso says ala aretz. What does it mean? Sheretz hashoretz la'aretz. Lahotzia says zizun shabadoshim. So this excludes the zizim that was found in lentil beans. Vesayetushin shabaklisasim, and these are mosquitoes that are in a certain bean. The tolat shabatmarim, or worms in dates or figs. And then b'taniyidich kol hasheretz hashoretz la'aretz l'rabois. So that brayso excluded them, and another brayso includes them. The rabois tolat shabi'ikrei zaysim. This includes in the prohibition worms that are in the roots of olives and in the vines of grapes. Now, my lab, the Gemara goes and explains, both braysos, they're both in the fruit, but the difference is, one's connected to the ground, one's not connected to the ground. So the verse is law, both are talking about cases where it was connected to the ground. The lo kasha, that means this Gemara ends up by saying if it's found in the fruit, it's okay, even if it's connected to the ground. But if it's found sort of in the bark of the tree, then it would be a problem. So according to Shmuel, insects found in a cucumber or other fruit or vegetables that is still attached to the ground, because that's the way the Gemara ended up, or the tree would be forbidden. But the Gemara then attempts to support his position from a Baraisa, but argues that the Baraisa may not support Shmuel. Rather, the Baraisa distinguishes between a fruit or vegetable that is attached to the tree of the ground concerning which insects found inside would be permitted, which is again Shmuel, and insects found in the tree itself, which would be forbidden. That's how the Gemara ended. But the fact that the Gemara at the end of this passage seems to reject the support for Shmuel's stringency, appears to indicate that the halacha does not follow Shmuel, and insects that develop inside a fruit or vegetable attached to the ground would not be forbidden. And this is indeed the approach taken by Rabbeinu Tam. Mikan medabdeit, Rabbeinu Tam, Rabbeinu Netanel, Briva, the ein halacha k'Shmuel, the Omar Kisha Shetliya Bavi Asura. Shmuel said that worms that grew in cucumbers connected to the ground would be usur, but the Rabbeinu Tam don't paskin like Shmuel. By contrast, most Rishonim, including the Rambam, rule like Shmuel, since other Amoyroim in the Gemara agreed with him. So says the Rambam, Im hitliya b'hu mechubar, if the cucumber, fruit, or vegetable got the worm while it was connected to the ground, this insect is usur just as if it was crawled on the ground. Shalarts nivritz v'loken, and you get malchus for it. So it's not rabbinic. This is isur insect vadai. And the Shulchan Aruch paskins like the Rambam and forbids the consumption of insects that develop in fruits or vegetables that were still attached to the ground. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Peidalet tolaim agadlim bepeirot, ba'odam b'mechubar, that are still connected to the tree. Chashuv kishoretz al-aretz, they're considered as if they creepy crawled on the land. V'aser, avapi shelo pirish, even though it has never emerged to the light of day. V'hu sherichesh, as long as it moved. If it doesn't move, if it's dead, it will not have that, because it never creeped.
Ernie,
Yeah.
back in Uruguay, we used to have in the beaches many times. You open a peach and there was a worm. So we used to throw the worm and eat the peach. So we did wrong.
No, you didn't do wrong. Because in all these cases, Mario, all you got to do is remove the insect.
Oh, okay.
There's nothing wrong with the fruit. You just have to make
okay.
sure that when you eat the fruit, you don't eat the insect. But that's if the worm is big enough to see. Mario, we were talking about certain types of fruits and vegetables where it's not so easy. You've got to inspect them with light, and you got to spend your time inspecting them. We're not talking about if you can see the insect and remove it, there's no problem with eating the fruit.
Okay. Thank
Now,
you.
even if we rule in accordance with the stringent approach of Shmuel, though, it would seem based on these sources that insects that initially hatched and developed after the fruit or vegetable was detached from the tree, but are consumed before they emerge, would be permitted. Meaning, like we said, if you eat a fruit or vegetable where the worm had grown in it only after it was separated from it. Let's say.
How do you know that?
Hang on. Let's just say technically the farmers have plucked the tree and the apples have been sent to the warehouse. And in the warehouse, there may have been a larva in the fruit, and it developed in the fruit, but it was not attached to the ground. What the halacha now is telling us is midin, that insect is not prohibited. Period. Now, Walter's asking very good, well, if it's inside, you don't know, how do you know it's there? We're just saying is, let's say you consume that fruit, and there was an insect there, you would not be over for eating that insect, because it's not prohibited. As long as you're sure that, and we're going to see we're not sure in most of these cases, that the insect had not come out of the fruit and then gone back into it. Because if it had come out, then it's not considered an insect that crawled, and now it's usur. And now they went back into the fruit. So Walter has a good point. How are we going to know? So let's take it step by step. So the Yalkut Yosef, remember he's Ovadia Yosef's son, gives us the halacha that we just stated. Tola'ima gedlim beperot yirakot betalush. Worms that have grown in the fruit after they were plucked from the tree. Dahainu la'achar sheniktefu. Mutarim. Those insects are permitted. They are not usur. Shelo asra Torah el sheretz hasharetz al haaretz. And this doesn't qualify. So again, let's review. If the worm developed in the tree while in the fruit, while it was connected to the tree, so even though that worm didn't ever crawl on the land, since the tree was connected to the land, halacha views that insect as if it crawled on the land. But not the same if the worm developed in the fruit when it was not connected to the tree. We just see it very clearly from the Shulchan Aruch and the Yalkut Yosef. Again, the qualification is, as long as we know for sure that that insect had never come out of the fruit and gone back in. If it had separated from the fruit, it never had to go to the ground and then go back up, as long as it came out. It means it's already prohibited once it came out. Even if it just stuck its head out. So just part of it is considered as if it's a prohibited insect. As Walter said.
How are you going to determine it came out and it went back in? You have to find multiple holes in the fruit?
Yeah.
You have to ask the worm which way you go.
No, Sydney, I think
anyway.
Sydney, I think
Yes.
Bernie's correct. If you see multiple holes, if you see no hole in the fruit, then the worm never came out. If you see a hole that it came out, and you have to worry that it came out and then went back in.
But where did this worm develop? When you say this worm didn't develop on the tree, on the fruit on the tree, it developed off the tree.
Right.
But it was there before it. I mean, it's there already.
No. So the way so remember, Sydney, the life cycle of a worm. Remember, they might start as a little nothing. So there wasn't an insect that was already in the fruit. And let's say the farmers came along and plucked them out. There was no insect created yet. But perhaps that larva grew sitting in the warehouse, and now there's a worm there. So the worm can develop within the fruit.
I hear.
Yeah.
I don't hear, but.
Say it again?
I mean, they didn't take it back microscopically to see where it was started.
Sydney,
or
a fruit, a closed apple, you don't know what's going on in there. So
I know,
but
there are bugs going on. Could be.
But there are many times where they know that the fruit did not have bugs on the tree, but then they get bugs later. They've researched that, and they know that an insect can develop in a fruit because the larva was there already. It wasn't a full insect that you could see. Maybe it was microscopic. Then it grew and grew and grew, just like an embryo, a fetus, right? You don't see it. It's just cells. Right, exactly. Now, like Walter said, this kula can usually not be used practically, since one can never be sure whether a particular insect found inside a fruit or vegetable, in fact, developed there after being detached from the ground. We also don't know. Was it there on the tree? Was it not there on the tree? So in such a case of uncertainty, we even before we look at the Shulchan Aruch, let's just analyze ourselves. The din of eating an insect is what kind of din? Is it deraisa or rabban?
Deraisa.
It's deraisa. Sheretz ha-shoretz. Last week we learned that you get 5 different malkios or 6 different malkios for flying worms. So it's deraisa. Now we know if it's a safek deraisa lechumra. It's only safek derabanan lekula. So the Shulchan Aruch rules, pre-shit liya, if you have a fruit and you find a worm in it, ve'en yadua im b'mechubrin b'talush, we don't know whether it developed, that worm got there connected to the tree or not. Osir, he's paskening safek deraisa lechumra. Classic halachic principle. Now,
one second, can you do rough? If you see most people agree that that usually doesn't happen in the tree, but it develops afterwards.
No, you can't use rove. You can't use rove because this is a deraisa dikadin. So each and every insect, we're talking about you found an insect, Johnny, in the fruit. So they're not going to rely on rove at this point and say, because we're going to see even a miut animsa, 10% is going to be something that you have to worry about. So at this point, we're not relying on, there's no mention here of rove. He doesn't say anything that the majority of them are formed on the tree or not on the tree, and therefore it's a suffix. Each individual worm, when you find it, it's a suffix, whether it's a permitted one or not a permitted one, and therefore it's a suffix. It has to be treated as such. On every case like that, you find a piece of meat. Let's put it this way. If you find a piece of meat outside of 9 butcher shop, we do follow rove. But there it's called a parish meruba parish. So that's a different kind of rove. Here you have one mitzias, you have to deal with what it is. So there we would not use a statistical estimation at that time. So for example, if you find a piece of meat on the floor, you have 10 butcher shops, 9 kosher, 1 trace, and you find a piece of meat on the floor in one of the stores. And then you forgot, which store it was in. So that's 50-50, and we're not allowed to eat it. We say, Sofek, Doraisa L'churma, we can't eat it. If you find the meat outside on the street, then technically, call a parish miruba parish, and we would say it's a kosher piece. Now, would we la halacha allow you to eat it? Absolutely not. Why not? Because it's considered basar shenis alim and ayin. Kosher meat cannot have your eye taken off of it unless it's got 2 seals. That's the concept of 2 seals, because we're concerned that it might have been a kosher piece of meat, but somebody switched it. So since it's basar shenis alim and ayin, there was a period of time where nobody knew, nobody had their eye on that piece of meat, even though me'ikar adin, you could eat it because it might be a kosher piece of meat from the dinim of rov kol haparish miruba parish, basar shenis alim and ayin, you wouldn't be able to eat it. Anyways, that's just a long response to what Johnny asked. He asked a good question, and we're going to deal a little bit more with these statistics soon. Let's just learn one more halacha, which will get us to where we need to go. A somewhat similar distinction is given with regard to insects found in water. According to Shulchan Aruch, insects that develop completely within independent bodies of water, such as in a well, are not included in the Isser against water insects. And this is going to come to this issue of copepods, which we'll end up with. He says, Shrotzim Hagdolim, Hagdolim b'mayim shebekelim, insects that grow in a pot of water, or shebeboros, or in a bore, or cave, she'eina novid, that don't flow, are mutarim. Lefichach, shoicha v'shoisa mehem, you can bend and drink from these bores, if they come into your mouth. Ramo, aval also lisho of the cleavage toast, man. You can't use a pail. If these insects that grew in the water crawled out of the water and then came back, then we have a problem. Let me read the footnote. This halacha became extremely relevant in regard to the Copepod controversy in New York City, water, where some poskim took the stand that regular unfiltered tap water was forbidden to drink due to the presence of copepods, which are numerous small insects that entered the water system from the reservoirs. Other poskim permitted it, with one of the arguments being that these copepods initiated in reservoirs, which might be halachically equivalent to the water found in the locations mentioned here in the Shulchan Aruch, like Bor, Sichin, Ma'aros. Although the Shulchan Aruch states that they are forbidden once they have left these locations, he ruled in 84.4 that if the insects are already dead, which was the case with the copepods, they would be permitted. Alternatively, some consider the entire water system to all have the status of the same utensil. And he gives you some sources regarding that issue. So now we understand what this issue was regarding insects that are created in the water. Now, we're going to deal a little bit more with what Johnny wanted with the percentages. That means, what are the real fruits and vegetables? What's the rate of infestation? What fruits and vegetables must we check? Do we not have to check because they're considered clean? And what is considered a significant minority where we have to check them? That we're going to learn next week. Now, please, everyone, I believe that we will start volume 5 next week. I believe I gave out volume 5. Now, if somebody doesn't have volume 5, because I'm going to save the Hilchos Chanukah, which is at the end of this volume for Chanukah, for like a few weeks before Chanukah. So next week, I think we're going to finish volume 4 and start volume 5. So if anybody needs volume 5, let me know and I'll get them the volume 5.
Ernie, I need volume 5.
We'll get you volume 5. Okay, let me know, please. Same, say it's $17. That's the same cost for all the for the. I think I ordered volume 5. I gave out some volume 5s to most of the people, but whoever doesn't have, let me know. And we're gonna have Yomi Mario when? Few minutes.
You have to unmute yourself, Mario.
Anybody have
out.
any?
Yeah,
Anybody have any
Ernie.
questions, comments?
7, 8 minutes, please.
Okay.
Ernie,
Anybody comments, questions?
I have a comment, Ernie. Lamaisa, if you see, at least from my perspective, if I see a bug in a fruit, that's the end of me eating the fruit. I throw it away.
Why can't you just remove the insect?
I lost my time eating that fruit.
Okay. But
So,
technically, all you
I
have to
don't
do
know,
is remove.
maybe,
Yeah, but you only-
Right.
socioeconomic status, people would preserve and want to eat the fruit if they don't have, enough to go around. But
Fine.
I don't know what the rest of you think, but
I told you, in Uruguay, we pulled them out and ate them.
I think that's not a problem, Bernie. The problem is when you have half an insect in that fruit, then you got a problem.
depends where it's growing.
All right.
Half an
Okay.
problem.
Okay.
Good night.
Interesting
Bye.
share.
Bye.